Hello my friend, in today's N8N tutorial I will teach you how to build an AI legal assistant. So let's switch over here real quick to what we're gonna dive into today. And I not only want you to understand what we're doing and copy it, but I also want to really help you to think like an AI transformation expert, because let's be real, the part of building workflows with N8N or Make or other workflow builders will become easier and easier. And even more, the role of the AI transformation expert will evolve. That's the person that talks to the client, understands the human side, the issues that arise in the business process, is able to translate that into AI solutions, and then is able to apply that, right? So that's exactly what I want to help you achieve in today's tutorial. So what we're doing today is we try to help law firms, let's go over here, law firms, in-house automation companies or departments, compliance monitoring departments, legal tech startups, to do things that usually paralegal would do. So usually what a paralegal would do is draft documents, do legal research, case management, like a lot of stuff that is really tedious and tiring and typical grunt work. So what we want to achieve is basically that this grunt work becomes less and less, so that the paralegal actually has more time to talk to the client and to provide value to them. And therefore we need to understand, you need to understand what parts of this whole task overview of a paralegal can be automated, in what ways it can be automated, and that's exactly what we should take a look at right now if we try to map this out. So I want you to think like an AI automation expert, and not only automation expert, but a transformation expert. So what you would find yourself doing probably is you would sit across a client, and the client is from some law firm, for example, and you would ask them, like, how do you solve the problem right now? What would they do? They would probably say, right now, the client comes through the door and brings all his case files, like a lot of stuff. Actually, I mapped that out here somewhere. Legal docs like family law files, client intake, marriage records, agreements, some file organization for court docs, work products, research here, stuff like pleadings, motions, some form of evidence and stuff. So basically they come in through the door and they have all these documents here in more or less ordered way. And they basically bring this huge washing bin with all these documents in them, okay? And then we question the client, what are you doing now? And what's the client gonna say? Right now, we give this whole thing to our paralegal, to a legal assistant, right? To an associate maybe. So that person then has the ungrateful task of going through that whole stuff and kind of putting it in order, right? So they need to take the whole bag that is unordered and they need to order it in some form. And they also, in the next step, probably will need to understand it. So they need to, in their mind, chunk it down to understand that when someone asks them a question about it, they need to know, hey, it's this square or it's this square that has the answer. So that's basically like it's page 13 in this or that document. And that is very tedious. And once the paralegal, that person here, would leave the company, if they would leave the company, then part of that knowledge leaves the company as well, which is not ideal if you want to fulfill a role, but the person that takes that role leaves. That is often a dependency company doesn't really want towards their employees, right? So if we want to advise the owner of the company, then we would probably advise them to not be dependent on single employees, right? So now if we have this mapped out, the question is like, what do we do? How do we automate this? What do we do with the automation process? So probably the client, this is like current, so future. So what would this be in the future? Well, probably the client would still come through the door and they may or may not have still their whole bag here of all these documents, the washing bin. And now the paralegal would probably go and not sort this all in a manual way, but they would scan it and they would put it in a storage. And for that storage, we could say, okay, it needs to be stored someplace on a hard disk, ideally in the cloud. That's the first thing that we say, okay, what tool would solve this task? Yeah, so that storage inside our, like an electronic mirror of the actual paper file, that would be something where Google Drive would come in and solve that task. Okay. Now, the next thing is we gotta understand that from that Google Drive, our client wants to be able basically to have a scenario where they come in, they have a question, and then something happens and an answer comes out, right? That's basically what right now the paralegal does, and the paralegal knows, hey, here, this is the answer. So look at this or that document and there's the answer, right? So we need to have that in place somehow in our AI fashion, right? So in that fashion, the Google Drive is the first thing that we need. So we need to store it someplace, okay? So let's say here G Drive is the first thing. And now it needs to have the same process that we have here. So this is basically it's ordered in G Drive, yeah? So here we have all these documents ordered. Now we need to figure out how do we do this? Like how do we do this gridding, this understanding of different files? And that is exactly what a vector database. So let me show you an image here of what that actually means. So you have to take vector database apart and say, hey, this is actually pretty simple. Don't be like discouraged and intimidated by fancy words like vector, and you're not a math person. I'm not a math person myself, but a vector is nothing to be afraid of. It's just a set of numbers, yeah, just like your birthday is a set of numbers or whatever. So a vector in this case is, imagine it like you have different files on your computer, right? So you have text, you have images, audio, video, and all these files are stored in a computer in forms of numbers, right? Binary numbers, zeros and ones. And if I want to, for example, say, hey, I have a word in that legal document that says client, yeah, that is stored in case of in the form of a number next to the word name, or next to the word address, or next to the word spouse. Yeah, so these information are stored in a similar fashion because they belong to one another, right? And that is exactly what a vector database does. So it creates a multi-dimensional space where a mango is close to an orange, is close to an apple, but at the same time an apple is also close to a computer or close to Windows, right? So basically what a vector database is supposed to do in form of all these different sets of numbers, it's supposed to understand that apple and color go together, but also apple and valuation go together, because those are two different understandings, semantics in natural language of what apple is supposed to mean. So apple could mean one thing, could also mean the other thing. And this is done with all these different zeros and ones that are stored in someplace, yeah. So basically, if we go back here to our G Drive, now we need something that does the exact same thing as this here. So taking these sheets, the different docs that we have, and it needs to break these down, and then we need to be able to mark different parts and identify these parts so that we can then have that as the output, the answer. So we also need to have a mechanism in place that's the actual input and output. And for today's workflow, we're going to take a look at how we do that with Telegram. We could also do it with mail. We could also do it with WhatsApp or whatever other tool. You just need to have some input and output. So this would be Telegram, yeah, and this would be Telegram as well, because you first query the whole thing, and then it needs to give you some result. It needs to give you some answer. So you talk to your client, and the client says, yeah, that sounds good. I'm using Telegram anyways, and it's good in regards to privacy and all that stuff. Yeah, so that kind of looks good. So you start to map out how the whole process is supposed to look like, because this here is your storage, and those red dots there, this is the AI, let's call it the AI agent. And the AI agent actually goes and says, in what shelf is the information that I need? And it goes there and then returns that. So if we take a look at this is exactly what we see here mapped. This is the AI legal assistant, where we pose a question. Yeah, so we have a connection to to a Telegram bot. I'll show you in a second how we set this up. And then we have an AI agent that actually understands what the question is supposed to mean. And it references the Supabase vector store, which is just what we saw here. Yeah, so this here is Supabase vector store, that's VS, and it's stored here, and then it gives it out, yeah, as a kind of like a nice little text. So how does it look like in practice? That in practice looks like I have a bot set up here, an AI legal assistant bot, and I ask it like, tell me something about the docs you have stored. Now let's see what it brings out. So while we do this, we can see here the executions are actually running right now. So once it's done, yeah, whoops, it's done, and it gives us the information back, right? So I got stored a GPU, license, a purchase agreement, blah, 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 some stuff about it. Now what is that? That is actually something that is stored here in the actual vector database in Supabase. Yeah, this is Supabase, and that's the stuff that is stored in here. And that originally was this nice little document, yeah, just like a document that you would find in any law firm in the millions. And except for now it's been chunked down. So the same thing, that one document has been chunked down to 4 different parts, and it's also visible. These 4 parts all have the same ID, right? Because it's important for the tool to understand, hey, these are all parts of the same file. So if somebody asks me, they are probably kind of part of the same thing, right? So if I were to reference this in my assistant, then I would expect a similar result here, or a result that kind of goes and is coherent and consistent, right? So the way we set this up is we have let's go back to the editor here. We need to have the document ingestion part. We have talked about this. And we also probably need something if we were to look at this again, because 2 things we haven't seen here so far are probably a deletion method, yeah, because at some point documents will become obsolete or they will be outdated, so we need some form of update, yeah. So we're going to talk about how do we delete documents as well, and that is not as easy sometimes with some of these vector databases as with others. So that's why we chose Supabase, because, for example, in Pinecone is still great, but the Pinecone node at the moment in N8N is not the best. So we're using Supabase and we're pretty happy with that. So let's actually set this up, and we try to go in as much detail as necessary for you to understand it, but not more, so you're not bored, right? So we pause this. This is currently set to active. So now it's inactive. And now we do and fetch a test event. So the test event is necessary so that we know what we are actually working with, right? So what do we have here? We have credentials, first of all. So if you don't have credentials set up in your Google Drive, yeah, you first of all, you go and say, okay, G Drive, I scroll down here, and down here I probably need to click on this and go on changes involving a specific folder, right? This is probably what we want. And this opens up this empty node here where we need to connect our Google Drive with. And if you've never used this before, it's probably going to look like this. So you have a redirect URL or URI, and we need a client ID, we need a client secret. Okay, so you probably click on this once, and then you go to your console in Google. Now, if you have a Google account, you should have a Google console as well. And let me actually open this here, console.cloud.google.com, and it leads you here. You may or may not need to add billing information. It's not going to bill you probably because it's all in test mode, and that shouldn't be an issue. And then you need to set up a new project. So you set up a new project, yeah, and we're going to name the project something like Legal Assistant, okay? And we leave the organization just as it is, and that's it. It's being created, takes a moment. There it is. So I can now click on here again, click on the legal assistant, and now I'm in the actual legal assistant. And the first thing we need to do is we need to allow N8N to talk to our Google Drive account. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to tell Google that it's okay if N8N has any questions. So we need to go here, type in Drive, click on Drive, and then enable the Google Drive API, because currently it's not enabled. So now we enable it. And once we enable it, that is the first step to allow N8N to get any information from our Google Drive. Yeah, it's not all the information there needed, but there's some. Because right now we have activated the API, first of all. We haven't allowed it, finally, to be used by N8N. So that's what we need to create here. Since we are here in the OAuth screen, that's exactly what we have here to set up OAuth. So we click here once, and it copies it. And now we go back to our OAuth screen here and click on Get Started. So we give the app that it's supposed to set up a certain name. So we call the app, again, just call it Legal Assistant just to keep things simple. And then we have the user support mail that can be just anything where you can receive your mail. And now it's an internal and external one. It's an external one because you use external clients eventually. Here, same thing. Give it your email address. Next, accept the license agreements and the terms, and click on Finish. Set it all up. That's how it looks like. Now, still pretty empty. Now, this already triggers us to create an OAuth client, which is exactly what we're going to do. And we click on here. The stuff that we want to build is a web application. So we give it a name, again, Legal Assistant. And now we see what we've just saw in N8N. This is the callback. This is the OAuth redirect URI or URL. So we click on here, enter that, and create it. That's the important part. And here we already get the client ID. So we click on this. This is the part that we need to store in here. And now we still need the client secret. And the client secret is in here. When we click on the clients and on here, then we have the client secret down here, and we can just copy and paste that in here. Now, I'm not going to do this because I've already done it, but that's exactly how you can set this up. So close this, okay? Once you've done this, now you can go in and say, okay, now how often should this whole process of going through the Google Drive here, how often should that actually happen? Now that should happen pretty much every minute, because it could happen that we upload the whole stuff, and it shouldn't be too rarely, but every minute it should be fine. And we can click in here and we can tell, okay, in what folder should you look for stuff? Yeah. So in our case here, we want to look at the certain folder that we set up in Google Drive, which is the AI Legal Assist case, AI Legal Assist folder, which is this one. And in this one, we should look for a certain file that's being created or that's updated. That depends later. For today's case, we're only going to look for files that are created, right? And that's exactly what we've seen in here. So if a file is created in that folder, then everything is fine and the whole process should be kicked off. Okay, so I delete this test node here. Now we also gotta do a thing that basically in the case where the actual person does the whole thing, the real legal assistant needs to keep in mind what are all the things that are stored in the shelves. And that's something that we want to automate a little more, so that once we need to delete stuff, we have some form of storage, what documents have been stored. Because once they're inside the vector database, they all look like this here. So they're all chunked up and they're all in these many different parts. And once we have that, it's hard to tell which of these are really belonging together, because in the end, we have a whole list with hundreds and thousands of these lines and rows in a database, right? So we need to somehow store that this ID here belongs to a certain document. So we need a document storage, basically. We need to have just the name connected to the ID in some place. And for our purposes today, we use Google Sheets. So we store just the name of the file that we have here in our drive. So it's that name and the ID that is given to it by Google. So we store that here so that eventually, if we need to, we can go here in a second sheet and we can say, hey, if we want to delete that later, we can just add that ID here and we can set up a trigger down here that once once there is a line edit, a row edit to that sheet, now we can actually go to Supabase, take a look at the table and say for all the entries that are in there that have that same ID, you should delete that. And that's exactly what makes sure that you only have high quality content in your database and you're not getting outdated information, okay? We need to say add a row, append a row. So you click tab, you go to sheet, and basically redo the whole thing we just did for Google Drive. So in this case, it's not a trigger. In this case, it's an append row in sheet. Could be updated, but in this case here, it's only append. So if you already have your Google Sheets set up, then perfect, you will have your credentials in here. If you haven't done it before, you'll again need to sign in with your Google account. And there is one thing that you need to add here, because here you also need to activate that Google Sheet API first. There we go. Sheet API currently disabled. So click on enable that whole thing and same thing. Now, what you will need to do, when you click on your credentials, create new credentials, and you sign in, it's going to tell you, hey, that doesn't work. And it doesn't work because we missed one step, which is here in the OAuth screen again. You click on audience, and here you see that you're currently in testing. So you need to publish the app to say now it's in production, because otherwise you can't address it in N8N. Okay, so that's one step that I missed before. So we can close this. Okay, so in the Google Sheet, you just say we want to append a sheet within the document. We select which one it is. So in our case, we already have that set up. Let's go to the one that we have here. So in here, we do have the credentials set up, sheet within a document, append the row from this document that we have in here. And it's only supposed to look at the sheet level. And in those sheets, the interesting thing is when you edit the lines, the columns here with ID and name, that is transferred to here. So if I, for example, were to put test in this other one here, now that would be communicated with N8N, and here you say, hey, the columns are outdated. I can now click on this and it shows me the test, right? So I'm gonna delete that here again because we don't need it. And again, N8N will make me aware of this and say, okay, this is it. Now in the ID, we just need to see, okay, what is the stuff that comes in here? So from the Google Drive trigger, Google Drive gives it an ID. Let me delete this. It gives it an ID. That ID is, we can find it pretty easily actually if we were to just close all these, because these kind of make it seem as if there's a whole lot of stuff going on. Well, there is. It's still seemingly very, it's very chaotic, but which is actually not the case. So you have an ID and you have a name right next to each other. So what you do is you just draw in that ID here, and you already see this is the result. And the same thing here with the name, and you just draw the name in here. So we had original file name in here, which is fine, but the name here is fine as well. And now we can execute this again. You can see what it outputs, and you see it outputs the ID, it outputs the name, and it can work with that. Now we need to say, before it can be put into our vector database, it needs to be downloaded. So we need to have a download file node from Google. We set it to file as the resource because we don't want a folder, we don't want anything else, not the whole drive. So we want the file. The operation should be download in this case. And again, it should download the one with that ID. And now we come to the fun part. So that brings us to Supabase. So you just go to Supabase. If you haven't installed the node, maybe you need to install it. And then you go to Supabase Vector Store, and one where it says add documents to the vector store, because that's exactly what we want to do. Okay, so we click on this and it's gonna look like this. So we first need to set up a Supabase account. So if you don't have one, you go to supabase.com, click on sign up, and it's gonna lead you through the process of signing up. And what you will end up with is you're gonna end up with a very empty database because there's no tables in there, there's nothing in there. So in order to get this in there, you need to tell Supabase, which is not itself necessarily a vector database. You can store all kinds of relational data in here. You need to tell it that you want a vector storage in here. So we need to apply a little bit of code. I'm going to skip this here for now. If you're interested in how to do this, please feel free to join our free community on School, where we go into nitty-gritty details of all this, on even the fun parts where there is this tiny little bit of code necessary in any of these processes and workflows, right? Once you've set up Supabase, you can go and click on Insert Documents in that table that you've set up. Yeah, so in our case, let's call it Service. And in here, we need to add two things. We need to add an embedding and a data loader. So there's two things. And that embedding is basically the thing that decides, if we go back to our image here that we had, that's the embedding is this embedding service that decides on how many dimensions does the vector have. So how many numbers differentiate the apple from the mango, from the orange, and that can be a huge number, it can be a small number, and it just depends on what the goal is. If we use the OpenAI embedding, then you have your OpenAI account connected to this. Again, add your credentials if you haven't done so far. I won't go through all the details, but you generally just go to OpenAI API keys, and it's going to lead you through your OpenAI APIs, login, API platform. And from here, you can go the whole way through. So I'm going to skip that for now, but that's exactly what it's going to be. And here you can choose the model, which means basically the number of dimensions it's going to use. And for our purposes here, small is enough. If you have very detailed information, then large might be necessary, but for most cases, small will be sufficient. And if you have more dimensions, it just takes a little longer. And that is it for here. So you don't need to do anything else. And here you have the default data loader. And the data loader is the thing that tells the whole process what should actually get sent to each of the shelf boards. So that again is the ID and it's the name in here, right? So that's that. So you can execute that step. And when you do it, first of all, there's data, which is the binary file that is being sent to our database. And that in itself should probably, there you've seen it already, it should update that table. And now we see we have it in here twice, which is great because we've had it in there before. And now it basically added the content from this file to the database again. Okay. So what we've done now is we have talked about the whole document ingestion. And the next thing that we'll dive into is how to set up the part of the querying the database through an AI agent using Telegram. All right, now we come to the actual Telegram input and output assistant. That's the part that we looked at before. That's the stuff that we've seen here, the input and output. That's basically like what the lawyer, the attorney would use to query our storage, right? So we got to set up Telegram first. That's what we decided on. So what you're going to do is you basically just open Telegram, and again, gotta scroll down, go to the triggers, scroll down even more, and on message, you again have to set up a credential if you don't have one yet. So what you need is you gotta have an access token and you have the base URL. The base URL is basically always the same, but how do we get the access token? Now the access token with Telegram is pretty straightforward. So the one thing that you're gonna need is, let's scroll down here real quick. That's from N8N's explanation on this. You gotta create a Telegram account first. Then we have to chat with the bot father. The bot father is, you find that here in all these places. That means the telegram.me/botfather. That's the tool you want to use whenever you want to set up a new bot for this AI legal assistant, for anything else, right? So just go to this URL. Once you've created your Telegram account, you create this, you click on Start Bot, And then it's this kind of little funny thing, bot father is the one bot to rule them all, blah, blah, blah. So we click on start. And what it tells us is all the things we got to do basically if we want to interact with any of our bots in an admin kind of sense. Now, what we only want to do is click on new bot here. And we got to give it a name. And once you've given it a name, I'm not going to do this right now because otherwise it creates a new one. But once you've given it a name, it gives you the access token, and you can just copy that access token. And once you've got that, then you can answer it and put that in here. You can add that to N8N. So I'm not going to do that right now since I've already done it. Delete this extra trigger. And now we have to think about what do we ask our database. We've looked at this before where we said, okay, now actually one of the tasks that the real legal assistant has, one of those tasks is to be there and to be that we can ask it all those questions, that person, right? And what we're going to do now is we have to have some form of equivalent and analogy to that, which is the AI agent. So you just, again, go to AI agent and you set one up like this. This is basically just connected to the chat trigger node in that case here and have a prompt. Now that prompt is incorrect here, but let me actually show you how that goes. You connect that to this one here, and it already knows that this is the connection you're going to have. And let's actually manually execute that step here. So we haven't had any, let's take a look here. We haven't had any conversation here lately. So let's actually do that. Come back to our bot, say, yeah, start. And now we can execute the step. Oh, it's gotten it. Execute step again. Let's see. Start. Okay, here we got the message, start. Now we can have that. You can see that there's this little green check mark symbol. Now we got to do three things. Basically, we got to tell the agent what model to work with. And for our purposes right now, I'm just going to choose OpenAI's standard 4.1 mini. The reason is for this purpose, you want to have a really quick model, and it turns out to be really slow if you go to GPT-5 mini, even GPT-5 nano, that the models are actually supposed to be smaller, faster, but maybe there are just so many people using them or whatever. For our purposes right now, 4.1 mini does the job the best, so we choose that. Then you can set up a memory, which is just a simple memory. Click here, which only has the task of being able to memorize and store the last couple interactions that the bot has with the AI agent. So if you ask follow-up questions, it keeps that in mind. So you have a certain context window length, which we in the standard way is just 5 messages. So it will keep in mind the last 5 messages. If you set that to 10 or 1, that's going to differ, right? And the last thing is you got to connect this, of course, to our Supabase vector store again. While we've stored everything in the first part here, now we gotta refer to it again, right? So the setup is basically the same as we've done before. So again, we're using the credentials we have before. Now in this part of the workflow, we're gonna retrieve the documents. Yeah, we're not gonna insert them, but we're gonna retrieve them as tool for an AI agent. And we give it a simple description that's not really necessary because the actual prompt happens in the AI agent itself, right? So this is just a little reminder. And we're going to tell it again which table to refer to. So that's again the same one as before. And that's it. Now we click on the AI agent and got to give it this nice little system message. Put that in here saying, hey, you're a helpful legal assistant. Your task is to answer questions of the user referring to the Supabase vector database to get an accurate answer to users. You only call it the AI legal doc store. Yeah, so you give it some cool name. Don't refer to Supabase. Otherwise, that's going to be confusing to the end user. And very important, do not make up facts. If you do not have the right information, you will say so. Otherwise, these nice little bots tend to hallucinate quite a lot. And so we put that in here, and now we got to connect the whole thing to, or since we have connected it to the Telegram input, we got to tell it that the input here is the text, the start point that goes in as the prompt, which is the user message. Yeah? So basically you just drag and drop that over here. And once we've done that, let me delete this here right now, since we've already set it up here, connect this again. And now we want to, of course, give that reply that comes out in the other output Telegram node, right? So we got to have the Telegram node again send a text message this time. So again, it's Telegram, and in this case, it's send a text message. That's basically what the one here is. And again, same thing, credentials, resource from a message, send message this time. The chat ID is the same if we execute the previous nodes. Chat ID is now the ID that it gets from the Telegram trigger. Here, it's this one here. It's the JSON ID. So you put that in here, draw that over there. And the text is the JSON output, which is the output over here. So you draw that into this field. Yeah. So go back. Don't need to do that again. So one thing I forgot to mention here, you gotta have the embedding again. The embedding is the same one as we've used up here. Yeah. That's the 3 small. That's just gonna be the same thing. Pretty easy and straightforward. And now if we upload something, we could refer to the documents that are stored here in our legal, what do we call it, like the doc store, legal doc store or whatever. And actually try that again. It's going to assist you with legal information. And again, on what page are the GPU details? Yeah. So are there any GPU details? Because I think what we have here is these GPU specifications. It's a purchase contract. And now we can see, oh, it's turned to inactive right now. So we can turn it to active, actually. And there we go. Yeah, details are found in Exhibit A, product specifications, blah, blah, blah. It basically shows us where it is, right? So we have that. Now, the last thing that we need to add is the simple document deletion part. The document deletion part is, again, the counterpart to the append row in Sheet. And now that append row in Sheet is not the append, but instead it's down here. If we have the store documents, then we now have also the delete documents. And here we just say, we call the column add ID to delete the document as the trigger, right? So we take the same credentials first, same setting for every minute usually, and the document's the same doc that we had before. And in this case, we just say it's about the delete documents list. It's not the store documents, it's the delete document. And now when a row is added, then do the following. Yeah? Then trigger the whole thing. And then what it should do is should get many rows, as we described at the beginning, should get from our Supabase all these rows, get many rows that have, let's actually see if we have anything in here or not. Let's actually do that right now. So if I go over here and I go to the store documents and I have this ID and I copy it over here and copy it to the delete sheet over here, and now go back and execute this, execute the previous nodes. What is it to say? Deactivate workflow to execute. Okay, let's do that quickly. Activate. It should probably have run automatically by now. Let's see though. Let's fetch a test event. And there we go. Yeah, it's got the ID in here. So let's actually see what it does. So we have the ID here as an input, and it takes that ID. Yeah, so it takes this nice little string here, the metadata ID, which then means the ID that we just put in here. And once it gets all these rows, then it should delete the row, right? So this is just the Supabase delete row node here. And that's basically it. So once this runs, let's actually do these execute steps. So it does the previous step, now it does this step, and now we can see that it should be deleting these rows. And there we go, it's empty again. Right, so there you have it. Now you can set this to active, try it out, play around with it, write some messages back and forth, add new documents to the legal AI assistant. Now, if you want to have the whole workflow pre-built, then just head over to our school community. It's just currently really starting to take off. It's still free to sign up, do it, deploy the pre-built workflows. Come on, build with us together, grow, learn, get the presentations that we set up for you. And yeah, have a lot of fun. And actually, as I mentioned quite a few times now, I want you to really think and build and act like a transformation expert, right? So if you're the consultant, you not only are the person, the bricklayer that puts every step, every brick, like the nodes together, because that is pretty soon going to become obsolete and unnecessary. It's going to be done automatically. But the person actually being the interface between the company and their needs and the people behind it and the tech side. Yeah, that is the important part. That's what I want you to learn. That's what I want you to understand and communicate, because then you have a much easier way to make money with this and to become first a freelancer and then build your own agency around it, your own AI transformation business around this. So if you liked what we did right here, I meet you again in the comments. Give me feedback. We're still finding our groove here, but if it vibed with you, just give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I hope we'll see you again in another video. Thank you.